Hello, bonjour, welcome. My name is Paul Keefe. I'm a business advisor here at the World Trade Center, Winnipeg. Thank you for joining our webinar, Managing Risk Through Circular Economy, which will be presented to you by Reid. I would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that this webinar is coming to you from Treaty 1 territory, traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojai-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the national homeland of the Red River Métis. First, some housekeeping information before we start. Please send all webinar questions directly through the chat box at the top of your screen, and Rick will try to answer as many questions as he can during a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. For all logistical questions, please send them directly to the chat box, and we will answer your questions as soon as possible. And lastly, you will receive a PDF copy and a recording of the presentation within the next week. So now it's time to start our webinar. I would like to introduce you to Rick Reid. Rick has held the position of Executive Director of Supply Chain Canada Manitoba Institute for 10 years and specializes in helping organizations develop strategies to optimize their supply chains. He has over 20 years experience in supply chain management in different sectors, including public health, manufacturing, retail, and mining. Rick also brings his supply chain management experience to the role as an instructor to students in Manitoba universities and institutions. Rick specializes in helping organizations optimize their supply chains by developing strategies to maximize efficiency, reliability, and profitability. He has contributed to the success of these organizations by helping them to eliminate waste, mitigate risk, and reduce costs. So welcome, Rick. The floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm gonna be going a little quick on some of this. Hopefully, I don't go too fast, because there's a lot of information in here, and I'm not gonna be able to get to everything. But I'm gonna try to provide as much as I can to give you a head start and an understanding of circularity and supply chain and how it can help you manage those risks within that. Some of the takeaways that I'm hoping that you can get is understanding how circular economy relates to supply chain management. What is circular economy? How does it relate to supply chain management? How circular economy can help you mitigate supply chain risks. And we'll talk about disruptions and some of the different things that we've lived through over the last few years as well. And there's just some initial steps that you can take right away to move yourself from a linear model to a circular model with your supply chains. Some other takeaways this is some understandings that just for context that I wanted to mention is what a lot of people don't realize, and they did learn over the course of the last few years with the pandemic, is that supply chains are fragile. They rely very much on predictability, consistency, in order to operate, effectively. And it doesn't take a whole lot to disrupt them. Disruptions, and the risk of disruption have always been there. The challenge hasn't so much that we have new disruptions. It's the fact that the impact of those disruptions has been so much more than what we're used to. We've always had orders that are late. We've always had orders that were short shipped. We've always had suppliers that are, having trouble getting supplies, but they were within a margin of error that we could absorb it and not really impact our regular operations. Problem with happened with pandemic is we were subjected to circumstances that took those impacts and made them many, many times bigger. And that's where we had trouble, recovering. And the pandemic, as I said, it basically puts you in a position where we need to have a new approach. And one of those approaches is adopting circular principles within your supply chain and your operations. So let's talk about current state. And current state is that, from a big picture point of view, human activity is damaging the environment, and it's causing climate change. We're seeing that. We're seeing more extreme weather. We're seeing less snow. We're seeing no rain or too much rain, and it's happening all around, and it's even happening here in Manitoba. And there's going to be a push to, make changes to help mitigate that. It may or may not be too late, we're not sure, but there's going to be a push from governments and consumers um, to have the people they're doing business with, take more appropriate steps. The risks of significant supply chain disruptions continues to be high, if not more so. We have lots of things going on. We have, weather conditions. We have, issues with governments, with China right now. We have a tit for tat going on with them that may impact, business with our second largest trading partner. You have a war going on in Ukraine that's impacting things globally. So you have disruptions that can and can't be, that can somewhat be mitigated, but sometimes you can't. And it was interesting as I was looking through this, I saw a survey from YPulse. They're a youth research and opinion kind of company. They focus on youth, but they had done a survey of consumers from the UK and Europe, and they found that the interesting part is that 53% of Gen Z, and that's somewhere between the age of 13 and 28, is generally what Gen Z is, say that they actively participate in a circular economy. And that's a risk to any organization going, this is a group of people that's either just coming into the consumer base, they're coming into that consumer power they have and how they're going to spend their dollars, and a whole bunch of people behind it that will be coming into it in the next little bit. And if over half of them are already focused on circular economy activities or sustainability, they're going to look to companies that are doing the same thing if they're going to spend their dollars. If they have a choice between a company that's not being environmentally responsible and one that is, they're going to vote with their dollars and they're going to go this way. So that is a risk, from a very high level that people need to be aware of, and you need to adjust your supply chains accordingly if you want to keep up. Supply chain Manitoba itself, we did a survey of industry, and some of the results we received point in the same direction. When you take a look at, I gave you an example of how youth and people coming into the market are looking for, they participate in or are looking for people to be more circular and sustainable. But you take a look at your competition, is that 53% of businesses already have a formal environmental or circularity goals in place. They're already doing work in this area. 54% of organizations, identified cost savings as their leading reason why to adopt circularity into their supply chain. And 60% have already taken steps to be more sustainable. So when we talk about what consumers are expecting, particularly younger people, and they're going to become a greater percentage of consumers, from this point forward, if they're focused on sustainability and circular practice and doing better for the environment, and your competition is already moving in this direction, you have a choice. You are either going to ignore the risk to your business, right, and opportunities to grow and do business, or you're going to start taking steps to prepare yourself to take advantage of the opportunity for people that are looking for companies that are responsible and more sustainable and more circular in how they do business. There's lots of disruptions. Like we've had all sorts. We had COVID restrictions, because of the pandemic, product shortages, the pandemic caused unpredictable demands or pent up demand that all of a sudden spikes usages. We have driver shortages in the industry. I have other, which is, like I said, I mentioned before, the war in Ukraine, act of God, disputes between governments. There's a lot of things that can cause problems in your supply chains. Other disruptions, and I don't want to go through these are just examples for people, but these are supply chain issues. I mean, if you had a container on the MV Reyna, your container's probably at the bottom of the ocean. If you had a container on that the Zim Kingston off Victoria, it probably was delayed or damaged by the fire on the ship. Same goes through with containers, right? Falling off the boat. It has happened. this isn't going on right now. This is from a little while ago, but strikes with port workers, if you're getting. I think we all remember the container ship that blocked the Suez Canal. It not only was what was on that particular container ship, but everything else that was trying to come through afterwards. And then, of course, I think we all remember the atmospheric river that hit the Greater Vancouver area, that basically wiped out highways and railways and everything, and cut, Canada's, one of Canada's largest port, if not the largest one, off from the rest of the country. And if you're bringing goods in from Asia, you were hooped. So that becomes a problem. So these are all risks. But the one thing just on these examples that I want to point out is probably the biggest risk that you take every day is if your supply chain, if you're doing international business, if you're doing business yourself with foreign suppliers, or if the people you're buying from are doing business with them, the longer your supply chain, the more complex it gets and the more risk you're accepting. So if you're in a situation where you're saying, hey, I'm sourcing products from, I'll say, the New Territories in Hong Kong, the amount of things that have to go right to get that product from that supplier, and I'm just talking supplier, I'm not even talking their suppliers, just from their supplier, from there to your location here, the amount of handoffs and the things that have to go right for that to work are tremendous. Any one of them stops that product from moving. Any one of those things can stop your business. And if you don't have anything to sell, you're not doing business. So that's a key, is the long supply chains. Now, linear economy, I mentioned going from a linear to a circular economy. This is a linear economy. Basically we take raw materials from the environment, we make our products, we use those products, and then at some point, the waste from making those products ends up in a landfill. Or when the products get to the end of life, we toss them out and they end up in a landfill. This is linear. And then it cycles again. We take new virgin materials from the environment and we go through the process again. This is basically how we've been operating as an economy for hundreds of years. Now, circular economy focuses on material recoveries. You want to try to regenerate and restore environmental or ecosystems. You want to maximize how much value or how much use you can get out of those materials and the energy that you use to produce goods. And the whole goal is to use less, use longer, produce less waste, have less demand for raw materials. So when you look at a circular economy, as opposed to the linear one that I just showed you, you have this. Now, this is something I found. It was on World Economic Forum. It was pretty good. So it's not my idea, but I think it represents pretty good. And you're going to see, a version of what I did earlier. And you see why I wanted to use this thing. But basically, I recreated it. But big minimal take. The idea is you take less from the environment. You're going to make what you need, and then you're going to use it. But instead of going right to waste over here, you're going to have different options to consider. You might recycle goods, have it feed back into the make process. You might say, hey, look, I've used this product, but instead of me tossing it, I'm going to reuse it for something else, or I'm going to give it to somebody else to reuse. Right? It might be a drill, it might be a CNC press, might be whatever, but you're going to use something, you're going to get more use out of it. It might just be shirt, right? You're done using it and you donate it to a thrift store so that it can be resold and used by somebody else. It could be something that you repair, right? Where you, instead, when something gets broken, instead of tossing it and buying a new one, you actually invest time and you get it repaired so that you can continue using it longer. Refurbish, right? Where you might update some things, do an update on it. You might repair it and say, hey, let's add a feature to it if it's possible, and let's refurbish it and then let's bring it back into use. Reprocessing might be those waste products we use, is how do we reprocess this so that it can be used for something else. But the idea, you can see where the arrows go. The idea is that you keep it you use it, and then you have options that you try to do as much as you can to keep it in this cycle as long as possible. And then it's only till the last resort that you waste it. And that's the case where you have minimal waste because you're using it longer. You're extending the life cycle of that product, whether it be in its finished state or whether you break it down into raw materials, and those raw materials are reintroduced into the supply chain somewhere. Or those raw materials are used in energy conversion to help develop new products or make new products going forward. But the principles for circularity are quite simple. Is you want to design out waste and pollution. And that comes back to, just going back to here, is if I'm going to take out, if I'm designing my product to use materials that are easily recycled or reprocessed, that can easily be brought back into the supply chain at some point, either as a waste product or at end of life, when I take that product when it's at end of life, and I can break it all down and I can easily take as many of those products and reintroduce them back in. That's a huge part of circularity. So what you want to do is you want to design, and that's where you have your best opportunity, is to design your products to be able to, as much of the materials that go into making them can be reused or reintroduced easily, not harder. Keep products in use as long as, keep products and the materials in use as long as possible. How many times I use it, I'm done with it, reprocess it, back into make it again. How many times can I recycle and reintroduce that? And obviously regenerate systems. How do you regenerate the environment? How do you, by taking less, how do you let the environment itself recover? If you're cutting down trees, how do you give that environment time for those trees that you've replanted to grow and replenish themselves? So that's circular economy. That's circularity principle. So let's talk about supply chain for a sec, for some that may not be as familiar. But supply chain is, just as the screen says, it's how you deliver your goods and services, right? And I'm not sure why it's duplicated, but somebody has to take a look at the guy that made this up. But it's how you deliver your goods and services to your customers. And if you don't have a good supply chain, you're going to have a tough time serving your customers. It has 4 primary functions: sourcing, procurement, transportation, and warehousing. It involves everything upstream and down from the point of origin to that point of consumption. And you're managing all of that. So there's a lot of handoffs, a lot of decisions, a lot of things where things can go wrong, a lot of opportunity to get people to use more circular, sustainable business practices and protect yourself. Characteristics. More often than not, I won't go through all these, but these things are generally characteristics of what would be considered a world-class supply chain. And it's really about, strong cost management, very integrated, very efficiency driven. But usually what a lot of people don't talk about is, how sustainable is it? It's usually a focus on dollars as opposed to, the sustainability aspect to it. Now that's changing somewhat, with ESG, the environmental social governance policies that are coming in for companies, and for governments, those are coming in. So it's starting to shift, but right now it's still too much. People are looking at the bottom dollar, not the total cost of the impact, including what you're doing to the environment with your business practices and what you're buying from and who. The key thing on this thing, and this comes into what we're talking about, shifting from linear to circular, is you need to be able to learn fast and adapt quickly. That's already bad enough in today's world. Things change quickly. You have to be able to move on a dime. But in this situation, you need to be able to learn quickly about how you can move forward with these practices and how you can take advantage of them to position your company in a spot where you can not only take advantage of growth, but you can protect yourself from some of the risks that are coming. This is a supply chain. Very simple, right? Nothing too elaborate. I mean, they're much more complex, but for our purposes, this works. And it talks about point of origin, point of consumption, shows your customers, here's your immediate suppliers, here's their suppliers, here's their suppliers. So right through all this supply chain, and this is very much that linear thing. Take, make in here, use, and at some point it's going to end up in a landfill. So this is very much a linear a linear approach that we're talking about, and it has been for hundreds of years. But if you take a look at this, and this is a different look, this is just a different way to take a look at the other diagram I showed you about circularity is you see here now all of a sudden you have all these things: cost recovery, residuals, waste management. It's not just from end of life products over here that you can see that are being reintroduced back in. All this stuff gets reintroduced at some point back into the supply chain. It's also each step in here. What are your waste products and how can they be reintroduced in here? Same with your tier 1 suppliers. How can they be introduced somewhere else into a supply chain? And how does the energy, that can be created, sometimes in wood waste that's generated from manufacturing, people use it to generate heat or to generate power to be able to go produce. How can you not only just have the materials themselves, but if there's energy, how can you use the energy from processes to help produce more goods? So I mentioned that supply chain has 4 key roles, and sourcing, procurement, transportation, warehousing. So when you look at how you start to connect circularity and how it can start to help you to manage those risks, it starts to come into here. Is better decisions in these areas is not only going to help you manage, the impact of future disruptions, it's going to help you minimize risks because you're going to get ahead of the game. And because right here, when I go to the next chart, it is about different decisions. When I'm looking at sourcing, what do I want to source? Do I want to source virgin materials, from someplace, where they're going to be harvesting trees, or they're going to be tearing up the land to get ore, or they're going to be doing something like that? Or do I want to source from an urban mine, like we have several of them around here? Or do I want to source from a source, here that has these materials that they've collected, they've been turned in, they've collected, recycled them, and then I could get them from there instead, right? So instead of getting virgin aluminum, which and processing aluminum, refining aluminum is very bad for the environment. How do I source recycled aluminum from a local source instead? Instead of sourcing polyester made over in Asia, how do we maybe source polyester made from recycled pop bottles that's being reprocessed and made here in North America instead? Who do I want to source from? Am I going to source domestically in Canada, in the United States, in North America itself, or am I going to go source from somebody who's overseas? And it's also who. Do I want a company that's just giving me best price and is not doing great for the environment, or do I want to have somebody that I might pay a little more because it covers the fact that they're being more responsible in their products? So when you take about this, it's about that decisions. It's not just 3 bids at a buy, I'm going to take the cheapest one. It's how do I balance the cost of these goods with the environment and the cost of the environmental impact to come up with, the best way forward. And that's where the decision making comes in. And this is where it's going to protect you from risks. Because governments, for example, are starting to, and there'll be more, they're starting to tax pollution. They're starting to regulate it. And when they say regulate, that means there's usually a cost associated. So take a look at the carbon tax. The carbon tax is something that's come out from the federal governments, and you're going to pay on this. It's one of those things, and I'm going to be a little snarky when I say this, but governments have never met a tax they didn't like. The only question is it something that they can get away with without getting a lot of political or pushback from taxpayers? Well, one of the ones that they can, and it's evidenced by how the younger people that are coming into their purchasing power in the economy, is they want companies to be responsible. They don't mind having that extra cost associated, going against somebody that's not being environmentally friendly or circular in their approach. So what's going to happen is you're going to see governments start to come and regulate what you do. There's already talk about regulation, for example, of end of life responsibility. End of life responsibility, if you're producing a good, I'll use an example of phone. you're responsible for that phone when it's at the end of its life. So there may be legislation and some things, if you're doing business in certain regions, you might have to take all the phones back when people are done and dispose of them appropriately. There's talk about making the auto companies have to do the same thing when a car, so it doesn't go over here, that if you have that Chevy, when you're done with the Chevy's got to take it back. And they have to dispose of all the items in a responsible way. There's a cost to that. There's going to be, if you're buying from a source that, if you're buying paper products that aren't FSC certified, you might pay more money. There might be a tax on top of that raises the cost of buying that product versus one that's certified, or it might be equal it out. So you got to be taking a look at those risks, because if your supply chain's not set up to source from companies that are compliant with whatever those new regulations might be, there's a risk to you, a significant risk to your profitability. Because if you all of a sudden have an increase in cost because you're not compliant, because you haven't been taking steps, all of a sudden you're scrambling to catch up to other people that are already ahead, and you run a risk of not being in business. So this is really critical, and it's a big part of what's going on. Same with procurement. You can source everything you want. Procurement's got to make the decision is, what do you want to buy? How much do you want to buy? Where are they located? Because what's that carbon footprint of getting it from, Hong Kong versus getting it from Edmonton, or getting it from, Winnipeg, somebody who's doing reprocessing goods out of Rosser, Manitoba. Same with transportation. What services do I want to use with them? How efficient are their trucks? What kind of fuels are they using? How long are they keeping their vehicles on the road? Do they have a good PM program that keeps their vehicles on the road? What are they doing to help make sure that they minimize their impact, so that if I'm using them, I'm minimizing my impact on the environment? And then you can see the same with the warehousing. This is where you start to really manage your risk. Is you got to be taking a look at, one, if I start to look at sourcing those materials locally from these piles and this stuff that's all around, instead of halfway around the world, for example, or even just halfway across the country, I'm minimizing my risk because I'm shortening my supply chain from wherever that is down to local as much as I can. I'm reusing products that are already available, or materials that are already available in my proximity, so that I don't have to go pull new materials out of the environment. I don't have to, all the cost and everything associated with that environmentally and otherwise, to get them to me. I have it here. So it's a lot easier for me to manage my supply chain, because I don't have to manage all those moving parts because they're closer. And then also, if I'm doing this, as I talked about, I'm protecting myself from whatever comes down the pipe. You won't get it perfect, but if you're using good practices that are already minimizing your footprint, you're probably going to be impacted less by what the governments do. And again, it's protecting yourself from that risk. So why should you care? These things, anybody could look at this, and it's going to be part of it. Yes, there's a lot of work. It's going to take some time, and you can't just like to snap your fingers. You're going to need to develop some things, but this is what circularity will help you do. It will let you reduce your risk. Short supply chains will reduce your costs. Reduced costs will help you increase your profitability, right? You're going to have situations where you're not going to have to lock up funds for greater inventories because you have a long supply chain. You have to keep more inventories on hand to handle uncertainties. They'll be closer to you, so you'll be able to reduce your inventories, right? You'll be able to be first in on being somebody that can talk about how you're environmentally friendly, and you could be attractive to those younger consumers, of which this is a very important topic. All you have to do is look at Greta Thunberg. I mean, perfect example of the generation that we're talking about. So where do you get started? Like, there's some low hanging fruit you can do. Like, this has got to be, if you guys are into this, has to be an organizational shift. It needs senior management support. It has to be. And I assume most of you are in that role. If you're not, you need to bring your senior management on board. This is something that becomes part of the culture of your organization. You can't just, do it, pay lip service to it. It has to be of how we are going to go source goods and services. How are we going to What kind of goods and services? How do we fit that into our business model? How do we change the design of what we're doing to be more accommodating, to have those, these aspects to it? How do I secure those materials that are here? Because as more people go in, it's going to get harder even just to get the materials that are close by. Then you are going to start expanding into a greater circle where you have to go get some stuff. You want to be in position to have supply assurance for what you're after. But some of the things you can do is assess your processes. Take a look at your processes and your systems and your policies and where are the opportunities. And I would suggest the best place to start is, how do you source products? If you need to go find something new, what is the process doing? How often do you look at where that product's coming from? What's going into it? What are their suppliers doing? Like, how do they get it? And what's the environmental impact of the product that I'm asking them to source, other than what's the price and what's the lead time? How do I come up with a criteria that looks at that situation and sourcing? And procurement. Those are probably the two best areas right off the bat that you can do it. Is if all of a sudden you're looking for these kind of products and you're incorporating that in, and it becomes part of your marketing and your whole strategy, it becomes second nature. I'll use an example. It's not circularity, but I'll use an example of when I was with a company that built trailers, large trailers, like for moving gravel and asphalt and low beds for moving heavy equipment. Is the company I worked with, named Arnie's, was known and still is known for having, one of the best, if not the best, trailer on the market. And that reputation allowed them to get a premium for their trailer because it was all about quality. So as a supply chain person who's responsible for it, my job was to make sure that I had production, but I did my job, but I couldn't go out and just go find the cheapest set of lights or the cheapest set of tires I could find to go on that trailer, because if I did that, I would be I'd be working against the company's interest, was about quality that supported getting a premium for our trailers. And that's the same thing that you need to start looking at when you look at those processes and systems that determine who you're doing business with, what products are coming into your building. You start there and you come up with a better way to source products that are more environmentally responsible, but still best value for the dollar you're spending. You're going to start creating that same culture that builds towards what we want. That's why you need the senior management side in, is the senior management needs to say, yes, it's in our best interest to be more sustainable in our business approach. It's more circular in how we do business, because that's what consumers are going to want. They're going to reward us with more business because we're behaving in this way. And as soon as that happens, everything else follows in. Supply chain does their thing accordingly. Operations does their thing. Marketing does their thing. Everybody follows along. So it needs to be an organizational direction. Identify, develop, give preference to suppliers that have adopted. So that's, again, back to that first step on sourcing and procurement. Sourcing new options, who are you actually going to do business with? Identify a way to go evaluate suppliers to figure out who's actually taking steps to be more circular, more sustainable, and reward them by doing business with them. And find ways with them to remove things that cause waste or cost extra money, those inefficiencies, so that if you have to pay a little more, you make it up for finding those efficiencies and integrating with them, and do that together. Enhance or develop a PM program. As I said, one of the primary principles of it is keep things in use longer. And the way you do that is to actually have a preventative maintenance program. Now, unfortunately, not every company has one. And ones that don't always stick to it to the diligence that they should. But the fact is that a good preventive maintenance program will keep equipment operating at peak efficiency for longer periods of time, and it will stop you from having to go and take that thing, send it off to wherever it's going to be, and go buy a new one. Now, it doesn't mean that it stops you entirely, because sometimes you need to increase capacity, you have to bump up volumes. But the fact is, the more you can do preventative maintenance on your trucks, on your floor equipment, on even your printers, just to give them a good cleaning once in a while. Anything else that you're using, sharpening tools, you know, like anything you can do to maintain them, to keep them there longer is going to help, because you don't have to draw new materials out to give you a replacement piece of equipment as often. And if you have a process in the end, I'm going to talk about the next slide here, where you have a way that when they do get to the end of life and you do have to shift it off, right? How do you implement, as I said, the second on there, a cost recovery program? How do you take a look at, okay, this thing's it's a waste product from what we did. It's the cutoffs of steel. It's the cutoffs from the wood. It's the, it's the, the old printer that we have. It's the printer cartridges, like the toner cartridges. It's, the old phones, the cell phones. It doesn't matter. I mean, I'm throwing all sorts of stuff out, but how do I identify and coordinate, those materials for either recycling, if there's somebody else that can buy them, can I sell it off as it is? Is there something I can reprocess on myself to make it available for somebody else? That becomes the opportunity. Like, I go back to my trucking example for those trailers we used to move for heavy equipment, is that those floor beds are made up of, they were 3x6 fir planks, and so we would get that, and that floor we'd cut those things to size, and it'd be the floor of that low bed trailer. But we had cutoffs. We had all these cutoffs around. And what we did was, it didn't, but when it comes to resale, is we turned around and we sold those cutoffs to campers, people that wanted to do that so they could take it for camping. Now, it wasn't, it was a cost recovery where we rarely get some money out of it. It didn't get reused in the common sense, but the fact is, those materials, you burning those prevented somebody from going on harvesting new trees to do the exact same thing. So yeah, it got burned up and it was done, but it prevented harvesting of virgin trees because we already had these things that were done and we were able to shift them on. So you want to have those systems that when you look at your products, what can I do? Find those markets, find those people where I can move them off to, right? So instead of going to a landfill, they can get somebody that can reintroduce them back into the system. And then take a look at, as you're looking at these products, okay, well, I can't recycle this or nobody wants this. So then you go back to the design phase, right? How do I change the product, the raw material that's in there, so that I can get something that's more recyclable or more in demand and still not affect the performance of whatever it is that I'm producing? Because then that's when you get to the next phase. But adjust specifications, that's the same thing we're just talking about. How do you adjust specifications to require practices? It could be practices, or how do you adjust specifications to make sure you're using products that have been recycled or products that have been repurposed, and put that into your decision making. Put a cost to it so that when you compare, it's not the 3 bids and a buy, I'm taking the cheapest one. It's, yeah, here's the financial aspect, and this item might be the cheapest based on finances than this. But when I factor in the environmental impact, this thing is actually, the cheapest one financially is actually, 30% more, because these guys cost more, but their environmental impact is much, much less. Factor it into your decision making. And you can do that right now. Even if your company hasn't fully adopted, you can take a look at this and apply it whenever you can. And make your supply chain visible. This is another thing I suggest wholeheartedly, is people think they got a handle on their supply chains until they make it visible, until they go and map it. And you don't have to map every single thing, but at least map those strategically critical items that are crucial to your business success. And take a look at where they're coming from. And I'm not talking just tier 1. Go back and investigate. Where's the tier 2 suppliers on that, and the tier 3 and the tier 4, and look at the practices of how those materials are being acquired and say, geez, because if I'm going back here and I'm looking at my total life cycle of this product and the impact I'm having, I need to look back further, and then even take a look at how your customers are doing, what they're doing with after. So you want to map that supply chain and look where those opportunities are to incorporate circular economy, or where you might need to look for a new supplier that fits in, or look for a new material because you have this outlier that's, coming from this random spot that is costing you significantly in terms of the environmental impact. So you say, I need to get this, and I need to get this closer to home. So those are some of the areas that you can, again, low hanging fruit where you get started, but it does take a much broader picture. Something that I do want to mention, and I forgot to throw it into the slide, is two things. Number one, Supply Chain Manitoba is currently working on a project around a supply chain assessment from a circular economy point of view. It's going to be for businesses, particularly SMEs, that can get their supply chain assessed for its efficiency and effectiveness from a supply chain perspective as well. And we are going to be looking for the training and development. We're going to be looking for companies to help us pilot this, sometime, hopefully in the next 6 to 12 months. So we would certainly, anybody on here that feels that they would like to, that's interested, that would like to participate and would like more information, we would certainly ask me to give me a call. My information's up there, because we would certainly welcome anybody who wants to move in this direction. And I encourage you, reach out to Supply Chain Manitoba. We're available. We have people that we can help with specific questions that you may have. I'll answer as many as I can. We have lots of time here today to answer some too, but just certainly reach out to the office and we can talk a little bit more about how you can apply these into your company or any potential training that your people may need to help start incorporating some of these principles into your business. So with that, I'm more than happy to start taking some questions here. Anything that we have, I see somebody's typing here, or was, but free to take any questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Rick. That was a really great presentation. I love the lots of good examples, practical takeaways, especially those, like the low-hanging fruit at the end. I think that's really good tactical information. And especially with the program that you're offering there at Supply Chain Manitoba, highly encourage anyone to contact Rick and Supply Chain Manitoba for that. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to drop them in the chat box there. I've got a couple questions for you, Rick. So
sure.
Just really a basic question, I guess, to kick things off. So if adopting a circular approach, is something a business truly wants to embrace, and clearly they should after hearing your presentation here, where do you recommend they go for support, like any resources, networks, etc.? Maybe a chance to plug yourself some more here.
Well, I think that I would encourage people to give us a call first. Circular sustainability has been something that's been around for a while, but it really has been kind of on the fringes. But what happened with the pandemic is people started feeling a lot of pain, and now it seems to have come to its time. And so right now it's a bit of the Wild West. There's lots of resources, but I think that the first call would be to give us a call and have a chat, and because what we're trying to develop is exactly that, to be that resource hub for business, particularly small, medium enterprises, because those are the ones that are risk. They don't always have all the resources like some of the larger ones, but they're also the most nimble, that if they get on the right track now and it becomes part of their business, the way they do business, the sky's the limit. It might help them accelerate that growth curve for them. So I would encourage them to give us a call, and because we have lots of things we're talking about and training that we're developing and different resources, and that would help. Maybe that's where they also get to influence what that is, because it is a bit of the Wild West, and they may be able to have some influence on the particular tools or resources that are done that might help them specifically as we go forward.
Absolutely. Great response there. Another question for you. So what would you say are some of the most, I guess, overlooked factors when it comes to managing risk in a circular economy like you've laid out here today?
I think the most overlooked thing is that people resort to their old habits too quickly. The easy part is, I went out, I called these guys, this guy's cheaper, he can deliver right on an expediency, I'm just going to go, without really looking at the other factors. They revert back. Like, this is I don't like using the word very often, but it truly is a paradigm shift in how you do business. Like, it has to become second nature. That's why you want to create those templates where it forces you, okay, ask these questions, get these answers so that they get in, because it's too easy for everybody as they get in just a regular day to day and they got 8,000 things coming at them, just expediency, it's just, that price is good, just go with that. and not going there. It has to become a habit, and that's probably the, to me, is the biggest obstacle, is just getting people to not take the easy route and actually take the extra step.
Oh, that's awesome. Fantastic. Another question. So do you notice if there are like any specific business industries or sectors that really seem to struggle with this or are just really lagging behind in terms of, the adoption of this approach?
I wouldn't say anybody particularly is worse than others. I think that this is new for everybody. Now, there's some industries that are a little ahead of others, but even that, they're not ahead by that much. So I don't think there's anybody that's struggling. It just comes back to it's going to be a necessity. I don't want, nobody likes government coming down here, but they're going to regulate things, and because they're going to want the revenue, and they're going to want to get some control on it. And as a business owner, you don't want to be in a situation where all of a sudden you're going along and you're ignoring this and you're not being proactive to be ready, and then chase. And it's, as I said, it becomes back to habits. Like, some industries are ahead of others. Like, there's people that are really doing some good things in wood waste, steel, obviously recycling steel. There's steel bins everywhere that are going. Precious metals. Like, there's some people that are doing well, but even that, the efficiency and connecting people that need it with ones that have it is a big challenge. And until you get more people, focusing on this, the entrepreneurial spirit will certainly take over there.
No, that's fantastic. Okay, so it doesn't look like there's any more questions. If anything pops into your mind, after we're done the session, don't hesitate to contact Rick or myself, and I could forward those questions. So that's everything. If you have any further questions about starting, growing, or expanding your business, please do not hesitate to contact the World Trade Center Winnipeg. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We appreciate your participation and look forward to connecting more with you in the future. Have a great day, and thanks again, Rick. Really appreciate it today.
No problem. I enjoyed it. Thank you.